Hello everyone. We're going to continue our presentations on fashion history with lecture number 5 on the Dark Ages. Oh my. A little bit of context first. The Dark Ages is defined as that period after the fall of Rome from around the 400s AD to the 11th AD, when you start to see kingdoms kind of coalesce into states like France and Britain and the Holy Roman Empire. In that period, there was a tremendous power vacuum. You can see here a map of these kingdoms. This is after the fall of Rome. Over here, over here you see the Byzantine empires, which we just talked about, hanging on. But you got Vandals, you got Swabs or Visigoths, Burgundians. Who the hell are they? Thuringians? I think some of these are made up. Anyway, you have all these little barbaric kingdoms, but you'll start to see them coalesce in the 11th century. Now, you do have one chap around 400 to 750 to one dynasty, two dynasties, the Merovingians and the Carolingians there. The Merovingians ruled 481 to 751 and basically proto-French kings. And then they were replaced by the Carolingians, named for the most successful European ruler before 1000 AD, Charlemagne. He became the first ruler to be ordained by the Pope. This was a big deal, which means he was blessed by God to be a ruler. He had a divine right. It was ordained by God. So ordained by the Pope, who was the mouthpiece of God. So he was the first Holy Roman Emperor, coronated on Christmas Day, 800 AD. After that, no unified leaders until the 11th century. That's a long time, so about 200 years or so, where you have these little petty monarchies that are not beholden to anybody. So you can't establish institutions. People stop learning how to do things. Craftsmanship goes down. Things like, say, reading and math, education. We don't have trades passed down from master to apprentice. So we do start to see beginnings of the feudal society with minor landholders pledging their loyalty to petty kings, but kings who are stronger than them. So if you have a castle, you pledge your loyalty to somebody who has a bigger castle and a bigger army. So mostly it becomes this agrarian society supported by uneducated peasant class. So pretty dark. Now, in this vacuum, in this abyss, is the rise of a new power class, the clergy. They're the ones, even though it's easy to condemn early church for all sorts of abuses and neglect, they kept formal education going. They kept reading alive. They kept the classics alive, educating monks, nuns, priests, so forth. And again, by coronating Charlemagne, legitimizing authorities having kings rule ordained by God. So, fabric production, not so great. Many skills were lost. Also, there's no established grower. There's no one who is consistently cultivating cellulosic fabrics. So you have a fall off in fabric quality. So most of it is wool. Some linen, keep it standard high. In Flanders, Flemish linen was highly prized. We're still getting silk from the East, from the Byzantines, from the Persians. But in Europe itself, not so much. One thing we do want to talk about is hemp. There was a sort of cultivation of hemp. Yes, good old hemp. Cheap, plentiful, easy to grow. It is an inexpensive fiber, so the lower classes would grow it and use it to weave as best they could and make some rough cloth. So we do see there is some fashion. We see mostly upper class and the nobilities, the petty kings, they got to look the part. So you start to see these some fashion there, but there's not very much deviation. Much of it is fairly Roman Byzantine. You can see in the 8th century Frankish court on the left, a paludamentum, a tunica. Over on the right, the Anglo-Saxon queen. This is all the way over in, Scandinavia and England with her dalmatica and her palla there overhead. So not a lot of variation from that. Okay, let's look at some simple clothing. Here's a new knee-length linen tunic during the Merovingian period called the gonelle, which sounds kind of French. Brachy we can now call bracos if we so feel like it. You can see there on his legs. This is a very common thing of this period, and from about the 5th century to the 11th century, having these leather strips crisscrossing up the calf to keep the bracos up, tied off at the knee. This is known as cross-gartering. So you'll see a lot of cross-gartering in this period. And if you're costuming it, you can't go wrong with bracos and cross-gartering. Trust me. Okay, we start to see some other kinds of tunics start to show up, creating a more formal and civilized silhouette in the Carolingian period. Remember, this is the one of the two only civilized, quote, civilized, unquote, kingdoms in this period. One of those colors is the chains, the other is the bliard. We'll talk about the bliard in a moment. The chains, French from the chanzil, a robe of white linen or hemp, was an undertunic, like the camisa, you can see here. Made of wool or hemp, later on became a lingerie item made of sheer linen. So, and a lot of times it would replace the bracos. Excuse me, I'm sorry, it wasn't, I'm reading this wrong. Let me go back. Lingerie item, under the chains, you would have hose, which will replace the bracos, which is just more common. You can see lots of cross-gartering here as well. Sorry about that little mishap. The bliard, which is a French word, basis for the word blouse. We think bliard is the proper pronunciation. Bliard is a tunic worn just above the knees. So you might have the chains, like we just showed here, the undertunic, which in the Byzantine was the camisa, and the bliard, or blouse, worn as the outer tunic, girdled with a belt, and the top, it bloused over the belt in a colpose fashion. So we start to see some stuff. Now, bliards are a little different, though. That's why well, why don't we just say tunica like we did so we don't have to learn another freaking term? Well, they're different, okay? They have fuller skirts. They were usually slit up the sides to facilitate horseback riding. You can see here, this is the bio tapestry, that it's a fuller. It flares out. And here we see in another tapestry how it has slits up the side to facilitate horseback riding, as I just said. Also, you kind of see here's the pattern. You see on the left the gonelle, or tunic, standard. You can see on the bliard how it flares out. It has the rounded skirt, which gives her that fuller look. So here's a bliard chains combination. Interesting drawstring collar. Lots of cross-gartering, so very typical for this era. Not just for lower class, but middle class and upper class as well. We can stop talking about sagums, palliums, palladimentums, blah, blah, blah. We'll just call them mantles now, okay? Basically a square, various length, held with a fibula of Frankish design. There you go. We do have this simple rough tunic known as the colobium, which is basically, you can see it is still a tunic. It has longer sleeves, belted, girdled, and then not full like the bliard. And of course, bracos with cross-gartering. Okay, that was easy. How about the women? Well, again, here's a Merovingian woman of the 5th or 6th century, influenced by Roman and Byzantine fashion, stola, palla, kind of a palladimentum. Domotica, really. See, right? Domotica. Those wide sleeves means domotica. Some decorative clavi. All very Roman. But we start to see, when we get into the Frankish, the Charlemagne, or excuse me, the Carolingians and the Merovingians, we start to see a little bit of variation, a little bit of influence from the Byzantines. We can see a chain, again, a domotica with the wide sleeves, a palla, flipped up over the head, and then the chains underneath there. And in the 8th century, these Carolingian women starting to wear their own kind of bliard. But they're changing it up a little bit. You can see here the bliard is more fitted there. And it still has a slit up the side here. You can see that slit. Chains underneath going all the way to the floor or ankles. You can see so the feet peek out, which was a desired effect. There. Then a mantle, let them in, wrapped with like a shawl or pinned with a brooch or agraff, which we'll talk in a moment. Usually a high leg. You can see it's more fitted. It's more fitted. It's not as full, but it is fitted and longer. Two reasons for this: castles are drafty, and Christians have morals. So you can't see that neckline. Nuh-uh. No, sir. Not until the wedding night, and maybe not even then. Okay, so over time, though, there is fashion. As you can see, these are Carolinian women here. The two on the left, wearing a corselet of padded quilted wool. I believe that shows that they are maidens. Long hair, as you can see, and then the bliaut girdle with a decorative quarter rope with very long ends. So you start to see this long silhouette with the bliaut there. Not showing a lot of shape at this time, but you do see a nice feminine silhouette in the bliaut. Okay, let's talk about hairstyles and headdresses a little bit. Merovingian men adopted Roman styles, long in the barbarian fashion. Beards were not common, but mustaches were. If you're a warrior, you're going to shave the back of your hair, grow the sides long, and pull the hair up into a top knot. This was from the barbarians. Or this was a barbarian take on the horsehair plume of Roman helmets, supposed to make you look fierce in battle. Not much to say here. You can see some common Frankish caps, sort of like a tam, a Scottish tam. Frankish women wore their hair very long. It was very fashionable to wear as long as you could. Wore, as you saw in the previous slide, two long braids that were pulled up in, a lot of times, and they were pulled up in a chignon knot, which is twisted and coiled into a tight bun at the back of the head. For starting chignon. I know some people call it a chignon knot, but we're going to call it a chignon. Chignon knot. It's a pretty knot. Head coverings: a separate small scarf of linen or fine silk called the couvre-chef, which is basically just up here you can see a cloth draped over the head and held with a little band. This eventually will become the wimple, as you can see, where it's tucked around, wrapped around the head and fastened above the ear or at the temple. Oh, sorry. Can't go back to that slide, so we're not going to worry about it. Let's talk about a couple of interesting footwear pieces here. One is the Bronican, which is a hardy traveling boot. So, soft, usually held up with cross gartering, as you can see here, kind of cross gartered. Some garters, to help hold it up. Open-toed and closed-toed. So Bronican, a hardy traveling boot. Hose became very important. I know these pictures aren't very good. I got to get some new ones. In England and Scandinavia, because it's pretty cold in England and Scandinavia. Wool or hemp in winter, linen in the warmer months. Often they were just kind of like a long sock, not like pantyhose, but like hoses you can see here in the lower left side, where they were just held up with garters. Often knitted, went to about mid-thigh. Usually, sometimes they only went to the ankle and tucked into a boot or high shoe. There, and you can see they would be also tied off. There's these look like boxer briefs, these short brachae where you would tie the hose to the brachos as well. So that's that. This is a pedule. This is a soft boot, or a sock boot, as it was called. You would puck your brachos or hose into it, and then you could roll it under, as you can see here, to keep it from falling over. Okay, quickly, jewelry. Very skilled. You can see some reliquaries and fibula here. Meticulous detail and very large. You know some of the pictures, about the size of a fist. This is the agrafe. I'm pretty sure on that pronunciation, which is a hook and clasp. This is a circular brooch. That's the one down here. This is the agrafe. Circular brooch done with cloisonne enameling there, and had a hook and clasp on the back instead of like the pin that the fibula might have. Clergy. So we start to see in this period a sort of standardization of liturgical garments there that you will see. So we're just going to go right into that. if I kill the pronunciation of some of these, I apologize. The amis, a slip of linen tied around the shoulders, worn by priests saying mass. Also, this is where we see the alb, the long white tunic, derived from the tunica talaris of the Byzantines. Very much seen in Orthodox and Protestant and Catholic. The chasuble, the cloak similar to the Byzantine lorum. The stole, a long narrow strip of material worn around the shoulders, like the pallium of days gone by. And speaking of pallium, a narrow band of white wool that was worn by popes and archbishops, usually over the cope, a voluminous cape worn for possession. So you can start to see we're standardizing at this point. It's a mixture of old, draped, and newer tailoring. And that's when the church came into power, so that's why the church adopts all these sort of loose robes, but that are also sewed and tailored. It's because at this period they became a power. Monks, we should talk a little bit about monks because this is where we first see the word frock, meaning coarse stuff. So a simple woolen tunic, roughly woven, perhaps hemp as well. This was just, as you can see, long, sometimes hooded, with a belt, a rope around it. Also an under tunic of simple hemp or hair. What kind of hair? Well, what do you got? It's more than just wool. Wool is hair. You take hair and turn it into wool by spinning and weaving. This is basically hair. It's mostly animal hair. I wish I could tell you how it was done. That might be a project. How they wove the hair, how it's not wool, but there we go. Long sleeves, cover the hams, belted, cowl sometimes worn, and attached to the frock. Some members have the scapular, which is like the lorum, but with an attached hood. Also, interestingly, they have very interesting hairstyles. There's two common hairstyles you'll see in medieval and Dark Age monks. One are known as tonsures. So we have two. The tonsure of St. Peter, which is kind of a round hole in the middle of your hairstyle, and the tonsure of St. James, which is pulled back. Both are supposed to emulate halos of the saints. And then simple sandals for shoes. Military, we start to see very similar to some of the earlier Byzantines. You can see there we have some plate mail. We have the lorica, which is a sort of overlapping leather panels at the waist. You can see here, this is very lorica-like. A coxcomb crest, and then some sagums, some tunicas, that sort of thing. This sort of low swooping brim was good because it would, if there was rain, it'd carry away from the face, so it's like a face gutter, but also it restricted eyesight, which can be a bad thing. This interesting person here is wearing his little Phrygian cap. I don't know who that is. We start to see more and more things like chainmail. Chainmail, which is, of course, this part, is more flexible. It can make good hood. It can be tailored in a sort of. You put on a padded long sleeve tunic and you hoist some chainmail over it. Then you can put on something else over that. But chainmail is a good flexible. It is heavy. I don't know if anybody's ever worn chainmail. I have. It is a heavy material, but it'll keep you from getting poked too badly by swords and such. Vikings. We have to talk about Vikings. Vikings were a version of the gunelle called the kirtle here, which is basically just a warm woolen tunic with a slit for riding. Then you might wear, by the way, this is the kirtle. This is chainmail. Sorry, I'll make that difference. What's the difference from the gunelle tunic? Just where it is. It's Vikings called it kirtle. It'll become known as a shirt or a skirt. Have a sagum made of wool, or excuse me, of animal fur. Bracos with cross gartering, and of course primitive shoes. Now Vikings, long hair, beard. Helmet was simple with a crest, nose guard, and eye guards. It was called a helm. If you do it in a Swedish accent, it sounds better. Helm. Now here's the thing: real Vikings didn't have horns on their helmets. That was Mr. Wagner we have to thank for that in his ring cycle. But they didn't have these big old horns like you see in mythology or fantasy. Quick examples. Here's some pictures of Charlemagne. Very keenly. This was also a period kind of towards the end of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. He was kind of at the end. He was one of the instigators of the end of the Dark Ages because he was so successful in uniting England and parts of France. But you can see here, looking very Roman in his tunica and his pallidimentum here. I don't know why I put the statue. Well, you can kind of see sort of the mixture of cloaking, draping from the ancient world, and tailoring starting to come in the Middle Ages. And of course, you have to research it to play or to perform The Lion in Winter. You can see there from the movie soundtrack the older Eleanor of Aquitaine, Katharine Hepburn, wearing her wimple. Here you can see kind of this lorem, dalmatica sleeves, just a simple. There's a kind of a graph of one of those big clips. There you can see. So this is again at the time period. Of course, as I mentioned, the ring cycle, which popularized funny things on top of helmets, as a bird on Brunhilde here, or horns, Viking horns. So we'll do that. This is the most recent ring cycle at the Met. You can see with the Die Valkyrie, the Valkyries down there, and then of course. History Channel had a really interesting show called The Vikings, where you can see that sort of wooden shield with the embossed. There's a shield maiden with the long tresses. You can see there simple tunics. Don't see a lot of cross-gartering, just these big boots, Bronican type boots that they're wearing. There are some more of the Vikings. You can't see, he has a tonsure there, and under his thing. And here we see simple tunic, a bliot. This is a good bliot of the period, a woman's bliot. And this is Viking people.